Have you ever wondered about the giants mentioned in ancient texts? Who were they really? To get to the truth, we need to dive into some ancient Hebrew. Let's start with the word Gibberim. You might see it translated as mighty men, which sounds pretty heroic, right? But that's not the whole story. The root of the word Gabar means to be strong or to prevail. In the context of the giants, this wasn't about heroism, it was about tyranny. These were men of renown, yes, but they used their incredible, almost unnatural strength to dominate and control the world around them. Think of them less as saviors and more as oppressors, casting a dark shadow over humanity. They represented a profound disruption, not just physically, but spiritually. Now, let's go back to the very beginning, to the book of Genesis, chapter 6, verse 4, is a game changer. It says, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward." This single line opens up a universe of questions. What does Nephilim actually mean? The word itself, Nephilim, comes from the Hebrew root nepho, which means to fall. So, a more direct translation is the fallen ones. This isn't just a label, it's a description of their origin. They're a cosmic anomaly, something that wasn't supposed to be. When the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, a version called the Septuagint, the translators used the word gigantes. Now, to the Greeks, gigantes meant earthborn, which sounds kind of straightforward. But for the original Hebrew writers, the meaning was much deeper and more ominous. It signified a hybrid existence, a blending of worlds that fundamentally corrupted the human lineage. This corruption was so severe, so deep, that according to the narrative, it was one of the primary reasons for the Great Flood, a cataclysmic event designed to cleanse the earth and reset the human gene pool, to wash away this unnatural blight. But the story doesn't end with the flood. The phrase "and also afterward" in Genesis 6-4 is crucial. It hints that the problem of giants didn't just disappear. After the waters receded, they reappeared. How? Well, the text suggests a second incursion. We see this when the 12 spies are sent into the land of Canaan. In the book of Numbers, they come back terrified, reporting that they saw the Nephilim there. They say, "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." This wasn't just an exaggeration born of fear. They were describing a real, physical encounter with these colossal beings. The spies specifically mention the sons of Enoch, who were descendants of the Nephilim. This shows a direct lineage, a continuation of that fallen bloodline. These weren't just tall people. They were a remnant of that pre-flood world. A terrifying echo of a time when giants walked the earth. And the most famous giant of all, Goliath, fits right into this picture. He wasn't just some big guy from Gath. The Bible describes him as being over 9 feet tall, wearing armor that weighed more than most men. His spear was like a weaver's beam. He was a living weapon, a champion of the Philistines. And where did he come from? The text connects him to the Rephaim, another name used for these giant clans. The Rephaim, the Anakim, the Amemphes were all different branches of the same family tree, all tracing their ancestry back to the original Nephilim. So when David, a young shepherd, stepped onto that battlefield, he wasn't just facing a large soldier. He was confronting the last vestiges of an ancient, corrupting force. He was standing against a physical manifestation of the rebellion that began all the way back in Genesis. David's victory wasn't just a military one. It was a spiritual triumph, a final stand against the shadows of the fallen ones. So, from the Gibberim, the tyrannical mighty men, to the Nephilim, the fallen ones, and all the way to Goliath, the Bible presents a consistent and terrifying narrative. These giants were more than just folklore. They were a key part of the story, representing a cosmic struggle that played out right here on Earth. They were a challenge to the very order of creation, a genetic and spiritual intrusion that had to be confronted and overcome. The tale of the giants is a reminder that some legends are rooted in a history far stranger and more profound than we can imagine. It's a story of fallen angels, hybrid beings, and the epic struggle for the soul of humanity itself. Long before Goliath, the Israelites faced someone even more colossal, a true titan from a bygone era. Let's talk about Og, the last king of Bashan. This story isn't just about a big guy, it's about a battle against the final echo of a lost, monstrous world. After the Great Flood, a shadow lingered on the earth. This shadow wasn't just a memory, it had a name and a kingdom. In the land of Bashan, north of the river Jabbok, ruled a king named Og. The Bible tells us in Numbers and Deuteronomy that when the Israelites were on their journey to the Promised Land, they had to pass through his territory. And Og wasn't about to just let them walk through. So, who was this king? The scriptures are very specific. Deuteronomy chapter 3 verse 11 identifies him as the last of the Rephaim. Now, this is where it gets really fascinating. The Hebrew word Rephaimi is a double entendre, a word with two meanings that are both chillingly appropriate. On one hand, it simply means giants, but its other meaning is shades or spirits of the dead. So Arg wasn't just a giant king, he was seen as a living ghost, a remnant of a prehistoric race of titans that many believed were wiped out in the flood. He was the last shade, the final spirit of the dead, still walking the earth. Imagine the fear this would have struck into the hearts of the Israelites. They weren't just facing a powerful king with a strong army, they were facing a legend, a living nightmare from the ancient past. It was as if a dinosaur had survived extinction and was now blocking their path. This confrontation was more than just a military obstacle. It was a profound spiritual and psychological test. But how do we know just how big Arg really was? The Bible doesn't give us his exact height, but it gives us something even more concrete, something you couldn't measure. It gives us the dimensions of his bed. Now, why his bed? Think about it. A bed is made to fit its owner. Moses records this incredible detail for us. For only Og, king of Bashan, was left of the remnant of the Rephaim. Behold, his bed was a bed of iron. 9 cubits was its length, and 4 cubits its breadth. Let's break that down. A cubit is an ancient measurement, roughly the length of a forearm from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger, about 18 inches. So, 9 cubits long is about 13.5 feet. 4 cubits wide is about 6 feet. That's the size of a modern-day parking space. This wasn't just a piece of furniture, it was a monument. The fact that it was made of iron also speaks volumes. Iron was a precious and formidable material back then. This bed was a symbol of his immense power, wealth, and, of course, his unbelievable size. It was a throne for sleeping, a declaration of his monumental stature for all to see. So when the Israelites, led by Moses, came to the borders of Bashan, Og didn't hide behind his city walls. He marshaled his entire army and went out to meet them in battle at a place called Edrei. This was it, the final stand. The people of Israel against the last of the ancient giants. And the outcome was decisive. The Israelites, with God on their side, utterly defeated Arg and his sons and all his people, until no survivor was left. They conquered his 60 fortified cities and took his land. This victory was so much more than just a territorial gain. It was a landmark moment in their history. By defeating Arg, they weren't just winning a border dispute. They were closing a chapter of ancient history. They were extinguishing the last living ghost of a prehistoric, titanic era. They proved that no giant, no matter how legendary or terrifying, was a match for their faith in their God. Have you ever faced a problem so big, so intimidating, that it made you feel completely insignificant, like a tiny grasshopper? Well, after Arg came the sons of Enoch. Let's talk about them. As the ancient Israelites stood on the very edge of the promised land, a place God had sworn to give them, they sent 12 spies ahead to scout the territory. What they found would test their faith to its absolute limit. In the land, specifically in a place called Hebron, lived a fearsome group of people known as the Anakim, or the sons of Anak. The spies returned with a terrifying report. They described these people as giants. In Numbers chapter 13, they said, "And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim, and we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and so we were in their eyes." Imagine that feeling. They weren't just big. They made the Israelite spies feel utterly powerless and small. Now, let's look at the name itself. The Hebrew word for Enoch literally translates to neck or necklace. This has led scholars to interpret them as the long-necked ones. This wasn't just a physical description. It was a title that conveyed power and status. They were like an aristocracy of terror, a ruling class that dominated through sheer intimidation. Their reputation preceded them, striking fear into the hearts of all who heard of them. But here's the most crucial part of the story. Where were these giants living? They had settled in Hebron. Now, Hebron wasn't just any piece of land. It was deeply sacred to the Israelites. It was a place where Abraham, the father of their nation, had purchased a burial plot for his wife Sarah. It was where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs of the promise, were buried. Hebron was the physical anchor of God's covenant with their ancestors. So, the Anakim weren't just random enemies. They were, in essence, squatters on the promise. They were occupying the very heart of Israel's heritage. Their presence in Hebron created the ultimate psychological barrier. It sent a powerful, unspoken message. The giants are bigger than your God's promise. Your history, your covenant, it's all meaningless in the face of our strength. This is the core of the conflict. The spies who came back scared weren't just afraid of a physical fight. They were suffering from a crisis of faith. They looked at the giants and then looked at themselves, and in their own eyes, they became grasshoppers. Their perception of the enemy's size completely eclipsed their perception of God's power. They allowed the obstacle to become bigger than the promise. 10 of the 12 spies spread this report of fear, and it infected the entire nation. The people wept and wanted to go back to slavery in Egypt rather than face these giants. They saw only the problem, not the God who had parted the Red Sea and sustained them in the desert. But to spies, Joshua and Caleb had a different perspective. They saw the same giants, but they saw them through the lens of faith. They pleaded with the people, saying that if the Lord delighted in them, he would bring them into the land. They knew the size of the enemy was irrelevant compared to the size of their God. Because of their unbelief, that generation of Israelites was condemned to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, until all who had doubted had passed away. 45 years later, a new generation, led by Joshua, finally enters the promised land, and who steps forward with a bold request? Caleb, now 85 years old. He comes to Joshua and says, "Give me this mountain of which the Lord spoke on that day, for you heard on that day how the Anakim were there, with great fortified cities. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out just as the Lord said." Caleb didn't ask for an easy piece of land. He asked for the very place that had terrified his countrymen decades earlier. He asked for Hebron, the stronghold of the giants. And with God's help, he conquered it. He drove out the sons of Anak and claimed the inheritance that God had promised. This story is so powerful because we all have Anakim in our lives. They are the giant fears, the overwhelming obstacles, the intimidating challenges that make us feel like grasshoppers. There might be financial struggles, health issues, broken relationships, or deep-seated insecurities. These giants often seem to be squatting right on top of the very promises we hold dear, whispering that we are too small, too weak, and that our hopes are foolish. The story of the Anakim teaches us that the battle is often won or lost in our own minds. It's about perception. Do we see ourselves as grasshoppers, or do we see ourselves as children of a giant conquering God? Caleb's victory shows us that faith isn't about ignoring the giants. It's about seeing God as bigger. It's about remembering his past faithfulness and trusting his future promises. Even when we're 85 years old and the mountain looks impossibly steep, let's talk about the most famous giant in history, a name that's become synonymous with overwhelming odds, Goliath of Gath. The Bible, in 1 Samuel chapter 17, introduces him in a way that's meant to inspire pure terror. He wasn't just big, he was a walking symbol of power and intimidation. Now, we often hear he was a giant, but what does that really mean? The text says he stood at 6 cubits and a span. When you do the math, that comes out to a staggering 9 feet, 9 inches tall. To put that in perspective, the average Israelite man back then was probably around 5.5 feet tall. Goliath would have literally towered over everyone, casting a long, dark shadow over the battlefield. But his height was just the beginning. The Hebrew text gives him a very specific title, Ish Habeneim. This translates to the man of the space between. In ancient warfare, this was a champion fighter who would step out into the Norman's land between two armies to challenge the other side to single combat. The outcome of this duel would often decide the entire battle, saving countless lives but putting immense pressure on one individual. For 40 days, Goliath filled this role, his voice booming across the valley of Elah, mocking the armies of Israel and their God. He was their ultimate psychological weapon, designed to crush their morale before a single sword was swung. And he certainly looked the part. The Bible gives us a detailed inventory of his gear, and it sounds like something out of a fantasy novel. He was a walking tank. He wore a bronze helmet and a massive coat of mail. This wasn't just any armor. It was made of overlapping bronze scales, like a fish. The Bible tells us it weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze, and that's about 125 pounds. Imagine trying to just lift that, let alone fight in it. On his legs, he had bronze greaves, and he carried a bronze javelin slung between his shoulders. Everything about him screamed bronze, a medal of war and judgment. Then there was his weapon. His primary weapon was a spear so enormous that his staff was described as being like a weaver's beam. This was the thick, heavy wooden bar used in a loom, something incredibly sturdy and thick. And the spearhead itself, Just the tip was made of 600 shekels of iron, that's 15 pounds of sharpened metal, in a time when iron was still a relatively precious and superior metal for weaponry. This was an extravagant display of military might. An armor-bearer walked ahead of him, carrying a large shield, likely a full-bodied tower shield. So you have this 9'9" behemoth, covered head to toe in about 150 pounds of metal, wielding a weapon unlike any other. It wasn't just a soldier, he was a one-man siege engine. This is the figure who paralyzes the entire Israelite army. For 40 days, no one dares to answer his challenge. They see an unbeatable foe, a monster of a man. They see the armor, the spear, the sheer size. But then, a young shepherd boy named David comes along, and he sees something entirely different. He doesn't see the giant. He sees an uncircumcised Philistine defying the armies of the living God. And this brings us to the deeper theological layer of the story. The encounter between David and Goliath is more than just a classic underdog tale. It's packed with spiritual symbolism. When David, rejecting the king's heavy armor, chooses 5 smooth stones from a brook, he is choosing to trust in God, not in human strength. When Goliath scoffs at him, David's reply is the heart of the entire narrative. You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts. And then, the climax, David slings a single stone, and it strikes Goliath right in the forehead. The giant falls, face down, on the ground. Why the forehead? Think back to the very first prophecy in the Bible, in Genesis 3:15. After the fall of man, God declares that the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. This act of striking the head becomes a recurring theme of divine judgment and victory over evil throughout the scriptures. When David strikes Goliath's forehead, it's a symbolic echo of that promise. It's a precise, divine strike against the enemy's most vital and arrogant point. Goliath's lineage, the Nephilim or giants, were often seen as a corrupt and evil line, a manifestation of the serpent's seed. So David's act wasn't just killing a formidable soldier. It was a righteous execution, a divine judgment enacted on the champion of a godless people. The shepherd boy, acting as God's instrument, crushes the serpent's head, showing everyone that the battle belongs to the Lord. Have you ever wondered what happened after David defeated Goliath? Was that the end of the story? The Bible reveals that Goliath wasn't an only child. He had a family, a terrifying lineage of giants known as the descendants of Rephaim and Gath. These weren't just tall guys. They were elite warriors, the final bosses in Israel's quest for the Promised Land. Let's start with Ishbosheth. His name translates to "he who dwells in the high place," and he certainly lived up to it. During a fierce battle, he cornered a weary, aging King David. Imagine the scene. David, the hero of Israel, is exhausted, and this new giant, armed with a massive bronze spear weighing over 7 pounds, is about to deliver the final blow. But just in the nick of time, David's nephew Abishai rushes in, strikes down the giant, and saves the king's life. This close call was a wake-up call for Israel. They realized their beloved king was mortal and couldn't fight on the front lines forever. It was a turning point, showing that the next generation of heroes had to rise and face the remaining giants. Next up is Seth, also called Sib. We don't have a lot of details about him, but we know he was another one of Rapha's descendants. He met his end at the hands of Sibbecai, one of David's mighty men, during another battle at a place called Gob. Each of these encounters wasn't just a random skirmish. It was a systematic dismantling of a powerful, intimidating force that had terrorized the region for generations. One by one, the giants were falling, not to a king, but to his faithful warriors. Then we meet Lami. The Bible gives us a chilling detail about him. He was Goliath's brother, and just like his infamous sibling, Lami's weapon was a thing of legend. His spear was also described as having a shaft like a weaver's beam. To wield a spear with a shaft like that required almost superhuman strength. It's a vivid picture that connects Lami directly to Goliath, whose own spear was described in the exact same way. Lami was killed by Elhananav, another of David's heroes. The family legacy of intimidation was being taken down, piece by piece. But perhaps the strangest of them all was a giant who isn't even named. He's simply described as a man of great stature from Gath. What made him so memorable? He had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. This condition, known as polydactyly, was more than just a physical anomaly in the ancient world. It was often seen as a sign of something supernatural, a mark of the demonic or the divine. This giant wasn't just physically intimidating. He carried an aura of otherworldly power. He taunted Israel, just as Goliath had done, and he was struck down by Jonathan, not the son of Saul, but another Jonathan, David's own nephew. This final, unnamed giant represents the last vestige of this monstrous bloodline, a final challenge to God's people. So why does the Bible take the time to name these giants, Ishbi, Benob, Seph, Lami, and describe their battles in such detail? It's not just an ancient version of a monster movie. Each of these giants represents the peak of human pride, rebellion, and opposition to God's plan. They are the Gibberim, the mighty men of old, standing tall as symbols of earthly power. They were the high water mark of a world that defied the heavens. Think of it like this. Each named giant is a boss fight in the grand story of redemption. They were strategically placed in the path of Israel to test their faith and resolve. These weren't obstacles to be avoided. They were challenges to be overcome, proving that God's power was greater than any earthly force. The story shows us that no matter how powerful or terrifying the enemy seems, they are ultimately bound to the earth. The message here is incredibly profound. The giants were brought low not by another, bigger giant, but by the small, the overlooked, and the faithful. David was a shepherd boy. Abishai, Sibbecai, Elhanan, and Jonathan were David's loyal men, not necessarily kings or princes. Their victories demonstrate a core biblical truth. Human might, personified by these towering warriors, is nothing in the presence of the Almighty. God uses the seemingly weak to shame the strong. He empowers ordinary people to do extraordinary things and overcome impossible odds. The giants fell, their reign of terror ended, but their names remain, carved into the pages of history as a powerful reminder. They are a legacy of shadows, a testament to the fact that every force that sets itself against God will eventually be brought down. Their story isn't just about ancient battles, it's a timeless message of hope. It tells us that no matter how tall the giants in our own lives may seem, be it fear, doubt, addiction, or despair, they are not invincible. With faith and courage, we can face them, knowing that the power on our side is infinitely greater. The story of Goliath's brothers teaches us that even the most terrifying legacies can be broken. Thank you so much for watching. If this story fascinated you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden corners of history. God bless you.